A 50G impact in the middle of the Suzuka Straight. A car launched at more than 300 kilometers per hour against another that was going 50 kilometers per hour slower. And the most serious thing, everyone knew what was going to happen. What happened to Bearman is not an isolated accident. It is definitive proof that Formula 1 2026 has crossed a dangerous line. Pilots, engineers, and teams had been warning about it, but no one wanted to stop the show. Subscribe to continue uploading more of this type of content now, if we continue. Now the question is direct and has no middle point. Are drivers being pushed to take unnecessary risks just to make the races more exciting? Leave me your comment so I know what you think. Lap 22 of the Japanese Grand Prix. Suzuka Circuit. Oliver Bearman hits spoon curve at over 200 miles per hour. At that moment, Franco Colapinto's Alpine appears ahead, much slower, in energy recovery mode. The difference is not normal. It's not a race. It's on another level, between 45 and 50 kilometers per hour, as if a single-seater was competing against a lower category. Bearman makes a decision in thousandths. Try to avoid impact from behind. He throws himself inside, steps on the grass, completely loses control, and in a violent effect, the car returns to the track straight into the barriers. The blow is dry, brutal, 50G. The pilot leaves on his own 2 feet, limping, visibly affected. He sits down. He doesn't fully understand what just happened. The team even has to show you the telemetry afterwards so that you understand the real magnitude of the accident. And here is the detail that changes the entire reading. It was not a clear mistake. It was not a desperate maneuver. It was a situation that the system itself created. Bearman had energy. Colapinto no. One attacked. The other survived on the track. 2 completely different realities on the same curve. And just at that point, the conflict that now shakes the entire Formula 1 is born. Because if this happened in Suzuka, what can happen in circuits with no escape? After the impact, the conversation stops being an accident and becomes a direct accusation of the 2026 regulations. The problem is technical, but the consequences are human. The new regulations have divided the car's power into 2 halves, thermal engine and electric energy. When a driver has a battery, the car becomes a missile. When you don't have it, you are exposed, slow, vulnerable. That's exactly what happened. Bearman activated full electrical power. Colapinto was regaining energy, even downshifting to recharge. Result, an absurd difference in speed in one of the fastest corners on the calendar. And here the real problem appears. The pilot cannot foresee this. There is no clear indicator that tells how much energy the car in front has. There's no way to anticipate whether that car will be 30 or 50 kilometers per hour slower at the same point. That is to say, overtaking no longer depends only on talent. They depend on an invisible variable. And that breaks one of the fundamental bases of Formula 1, control. But then comes the most critical point. The pilots had already warned. Since the pre-season tests, key figures in the paddock have been pointing out exactly this scenario. The meetings with the GPDA made it clear these speed differences were going to cause serious accidents. Still, no action was taken. Because the system generates spectacle. More overtaking, more excitement, more uncertainty. But that same spectacle is what has now put a pilot against the wall with 50G. And at this point, the tension changes level. Because when a risk is known and is not corrected, it is no longer a failure. After the accident, the paddock didn't react with concern. It reacted with fury. Carlos Sainz was the first to break the silence, and he did so bluntly. The FIA was warned multiple times. This scenario was planned. And yet, no changes were made because the racing was exciting. That detail changes everything, because there is no longer talk of a technical failure. This is a conscious decision. Max Verstappen raised the criticism even further, comparing the situation to a video game. A yo-yo effect where cars accelerate and brake artificially depending on the energy available. Lando Norris went further, describing the sensation as unnatural, even frustrating for the driver trying to compete with no real control over what is happening. And in the midst of all this, the most worrying image. A pilot who does not understand how the accident occurred until he sees the data. That breaks any competitive logic. But there is an even more serious element. The FIA had already intervened before the Japanese Grand Prix. Adjusted parameters, but only for classification. During the race, he decided not to touch anything. The reason? Keep the show going. That is the exact moment where everything changes. Because when pilots see that safety takes a back seat, confidence disappears. And without trust, Formula 1 enters dangerous territory. Now the situation is extreme. There are meetings scheduled. There's technical room to adjust the system. But there's also political pressure, manufacturer interests, and millions invested in this regulation. And that generates the great crisis. Is the FIA going to correct the problem, or is it going to wait for the next accident to react? Because after Suzuka, there are no excuses. Bearman's accident did not end at the wall. It ended in something much bigger, an inevitable change within Formula One. After Suzuka, the sport can no longer look the other way. The pressure from the drivers, the technical evidence, and the media impact have placed the FIA in an extreme situation. It is no longer enough to recognize the problem. Now we must act, and the options are clear. The first, immediately adjust energy deployment levels. Reduce speed differences. Limit those power peaks that turn overtaking into an uncontrollable situation. The second, keep the regulations as they are, trusting that the teams and drivers adapt. But that second option has a cost, because it means accepting that what happened in Japan can be repeated, and not on any circuit. On routes like Baku, Monaco, or Las Vegas, where the walls are centimeters away and the margin of error completely disappears. Here appears the true climax of this story. Formula One has always evolved after accidents. It has always reacted when reality exceeds regulations. Suzuka 2026 can be one of those moments. A point where the sport decides if it wants to continue moving forward or if it needs to correct course before it is too late. And in the midst of all this, there is a certainty that no one disputes. The current system has taken Formula One to a limit that the drivers themselves consider unacceptable. Now there's only one thing left to see: if the FIA has the ability and the courage to change it. After everything that has happened, Formula One not only faces a technical crisis, it faces a credibility crisis. Because when pilots talk about real danger when an impact reaches 50 G, and when it is shown that everything was foreseeable, the debate stops being sporting. It becomes structural. The 2026 regulation promised innovation, spectacle, and a new era. And in part, he has achieved it. More overtaking, more differences, more excitement on the track. But the price has been exposed in Suzuka. Speed differences impossible to manage. Decisions that are made without complete information. And pilots who compete without total control over what happens ahead. That is not the historical DNA of Formula One. Because this sport has always been risky, but it has never accepted unnecessary risk. This is where the final reflection comes in. If Formula One corrects itself now, this accident will be remembered as the point that forced the sport to evolve. Like those moments that marked a before and after insecurity. But if you don't, Suzuka will not be a warning. It will be the first chapter of something much more serious. And in that scenario, there will no longer be talk of regulations or spectacle or strategy. We will talk about responsibilities. Because when everyone saw it coming and no one prevented it, history does not judge the accident. Judge the decisions that allowed it. After the impact of Bearman, Formula One enters a critical phase, that of immediate decisions. It is no longer about analyzing what happened, it is about preventing it from happening again. The FIA has confirmed key meetings during the month of April. The objective is clear: review the energy management parameters that have caused these extreme speed differences. And here is the most important technical point. The regulations allow adjustments without the need to change the entire regulations. That is, deployment limits, energy recovery rates, and power distribution can be modified using real race data. The tool exists. The question is whether it will be used with the urgency that the situation demands. Because while the offices analyze, the teams are already reacting. Haas, for example, has begun to review the energy strategy of its car. Not only for performance, but for safety. The team itself had to show Bearman the telemetry to understand that the speed difference was much greater than what he perceived on the track. That reveals something key. Not even the pilot has a real perception of the risk in real time. And that forces an immediate change. Not only in the regulations, also in how the teams manage these situations in the race. Because the calendar doesn't stop. The next big stop is Miami. And although there are weeks of margin, the question is inevitable. Will the changes come in time? Or will the drivers compete again under the same conditions? This is where the final act begins to take shape. Not in Suzuka, not in the accident, but in what happens from now on. Because Formula One already has the data. It has the warnings. It has the clearest possible example. Now, all that remains is to check if you also have the real will to change before history repeats itself. Bearman's accident does not leave a shocking image. It leaves a warning that is impossible to ignore. A system that generates extreme speed differences. A regulation that introduces variables invisible to the pilot. And a clear decision: prioritize the show in an environment where the margin of error is zero. Because we are not talking about strategy here. We are talking about real safety on the track. The pilots have been clear. All, from the champions to the youngest. The entire grid understands that this is not sustainable. And when the consensus is total in such a competitive sport, the message is forceful. Meanwhile, the FIA has a critical opportunity in its hands. You can adjust the parameters. It can reduce speed differences. It can give the pilot back the control he should never have lost. Or you can wait. Waiting for another car to arrive too quickly. Wait until another pilot has no escape. Wait until the next impact doesn't end with someone walking out on their own. Because Suzuka was not the end of the story. It was the turning point. And now the question is no longer technical, it is moral. Should Formula One change now? Or will it take the risk that the worst is yet to come? Subscribe to continue uploading more of that content. Now you really think about all this.